Mr. President, on this day, a century ago, an extraordinary life began that would change the lives of millions of others. 100 years ago today, Nelson Mandela was born in the village of Mzevo in the countryside of grass-covered rolling hills in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. That day began a 95-year journey of one man that led the South African people to liberation, and whose legacy continues to reverberate through time. Over the course of his life, Nelson Mandela, known by his nickname Madiba, became venerated as a global advocate for justice and equality by millions, arguably more than any other political figure of our time. Through political activism and resistance, Madiba led a revolution by shepherding his people from racial division, hate, and subjugation to freedom, tolerance, and democracy. One of the most striking aspects of Nelson Mandela's leadership as the first president of a truly free, non-racial, non-sexist South Africa was his enormous capacity for forgiveness and his ability to open his heart to those who were once his brutal oppressors. 20 years after he was released from a lifetime in prison, Nelson Mandela invited to dinner at his own home one of his former jailers, a man with whom he'd become close friends, saying that their friendship reinforced his belief in the essential humanity of even those who had kept him for so long behind bars. How long? 27 years, 6 months, and 1 week. And despite all those years, months, and days of continuous imprisonment, Nelson Mandela never himself became a prisoner to hate. Madiba set the example of healing, forgiveness, and reconciliation that ultimately allowed South Africa's rainbow nation to emerge from the ashes of brutal racial oppression. His example is particularly timely and powerful in light of the polarization, distrust, and division in our world and even our own nation today. History reminds us, though, that this reconciliation, this openness, is not a new phenomenon. 52 years ago this summer, in June of 1966, then U.S. Senator Robert F. Kennedy delivered a memorable speech at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. Speaking to a nation then deep in the throes of the cruel injustices of apartheid, Senator Bobby Kennedy began his speech by describing, and I quote, "a land in which the native inhabitants were at first subdued, but relations with whom remain a problem to this day. A land which defined itself on a hostile frontier, a land which was once the importer of slaves and must now struggle to wipe out the last traces of that former bondage." Kennedy then paused before famously concluding, "I refer, of course, to the United States of America." Then, as now, the differences between the United States and South Africa are significant. Yet Americans and South Africans share more than we might recognize or want to acknowledge. On the positive side, we share remarkable constitutions, inspiring foundational documents in South Africa's Freedom Charter and our own Declaration of Independence, whose fundamental principles are profound and inspiring, but whose lived experiences have so far fallen short. We also share a deep commitment to democracy, societies grounded in the rule of law, a vibrant free press, and capable and independent judiciaries. We are also multilingual, multi-faith democracies, federal republics that have incredible human histories and deep and rich natural resources. Both South Africa and the United States have demonstrated how important civic institutions are to sustaining democracy and preserving the progress of humanity. Today, on what would have been Nelson Mandela's 100th birthday, the United States is itself facing serious challenges to the very institutions that underpin and preserve our hard-won democracy. As we weather these challenges together, as a nation, let us find inspiration in Mandela's life and legacy. Let us remember that on his long walk to freedom, Nelson Mandela taught the need to study not only those with whom we agree, but also those with whom we disagree, and to be willing to compromise and find common ground. In Madiba's words, it is easy to break down and destroy. The real heroes are those who make peace and build. In the years to come, it's my hope the United States and South Africa will look to each other as both nations continue to struggle against the legacy of racial injustice, reverse our growing economic inequality, and protect our evolving experiments in democracy. Nelson Mandela ventured to shape the world as it should be. He showed us that values such as forgiveness, respect, and tolerance are not just words, but concrete actions we can all take. I'm inspired by Madiba's example to keep fighting for a better, more just world here in the United States Senate, as I was first inspired in the fall of 1986 when I traveled to South Africa to volunteer for the South African Council of Churches during the anti-apartheid struggle. Just 2 years ago, I had a chance as a now senator to revisit Johannesburg and Cape Town with a delegation that included Senator Kennedy's daughter, Kerry Kennedy, and a whole host of the Kennedy clan. Our own Congressman John Lewis, a leader in America's civil rights struggle, and my friend and colleague, Congressman Steny Hoyer, and 2 survivors of the racially motivated shooting in a church in downtown Charleston, Polly Shepard and Felicia Samuels, there to serve as a living example of the challenges and the difficulties of reconciliation, of forgiveness, and of grace. We had remarkable experiences. We met with Desmond Tutu, my former supervisor at the Council of Churches decades ago, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, and someone who helped lead the peace and reconciliation process in South Africa. And we heard from today's Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, Nelson Mandela's widow, Graça Machel. And our reflections were interrupted by student protesters demanding a more just dispensation in today's South Africa, a jarring reminder that even the greatness of the remembrance of Bobby Kennedy and Nelson Mandela is not enough to still the relentless yearning for more justice and more equality by the youngest among us. I still today believe in Nelson Mandela's vision for the world, a world governed by justice and equality and peace and cooperation for the common good. But it's important to remember just how much we have to do together as a global community to hear each other, forgive each other, and get there. Nelson Mandela once famously said, "I'm not a saint unless you think of a saint as a sinner who just keeps trying." So today, let us remember Nelson Mandela's relentless trying, his historic contribution to South Africa and the world, the example of his struggle to promote human rights and justice for all. Madiba's service is an enduring reminder of what it means to place the good of a nation's people above one's own narrow self-interest, a lesson from which we can all benefit. I'm pleased to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the birth of a giant of history and to honor Nelson Mandela's lifetime of extraordinary service with a bipartisan resolution introduced today. So today, let us rededicate ourselves to his vision for our world and together work tirelessly to make it a reality.